Win up to £25,000. The Community Lottery, a subscription-based lottery that allows you to continue to support good causes that matter. When you win, good causes win. Every month, eligible good causes have the opportunity to win a share of funds that could help them continue the good work that they do in our communities. To apply, there's no complicated forms, nor do you have to be a registered charity. Just grab your phone, send us a 60-second video explaining your good cause and the difference having extra funding would make to your project. Visit thecommunitylottery.com. Hit the play button and sign up for either 13 weekly draws or by direct debit for just £4.35 that gives you 4 weekly draws. You could have the chance of winning £25,000. The aim of the Community Lottery is to create an additional source of funding that will enable good causes to undertake innovative projects that matter. If you're in, the communities win.
Right. Right.
Gentlemen, as we hand over to Tony Crossbody for our Black History Month section. Thank you. Give him a round of applause.
So what you got for us, Tony?
Yes, sir. So we're going to recap basically on what we discussed last week. So let's have the first slide, please. So we have been talking about, in the past, Black people throughout Europe. And we've been concentrating our efforts in the last 2 or 3 weeks on Spain and Portugal specifically. That landmass is actually known as the Iberian Peninsula. And within that landmass were a group of people that we identified as Hebrews. These were Black Hebrews, as we saw from our previous discussion. Now, what happened when the Catholics overran Spain and basically wrested it from the hands of the Muslims, they then enacted orders that they wanted all non-Catholics to become Catholics in a period that was known as the Catholic Inquisition. So basically, if you were not a Catholic, and specifically if you were a Hebrew or if you were a Muslim, if you did not convert to Catholicism, you were forced out the country, your assets were seized, or you would be killed. So basically, many of them, having been persecuted in Spain, went across the border into Portugal. However, unfortunately, the King of Portugal decided to enact the same law, which meant that specifically the Hebrews, who were the main targets of this oppression, and the reason why they were the main targets, because they were seen by the population as being the spiritual people of God. People had known about these individuals because they had heard the stories from the Bible about who the Hebrews were, and the Catholic Church did not like that sort of power that they held, the spiritual power. So they forced them on pain of death to become Catholics. Now, as you can see from the map, just underneath Portugal, you will see the continent of Africa. So many of them basically went across the Straits of Gibraltar and ended up first in North Africa and then into the West. Next slide. So here is a more detailed map of West Africa. This one was drawn in 1747. And in the middle of this West African map, you can see an area called Negro Land. This is where many of them fled into. And they went even further south into the bottom half of West Africa. Next slide, please. And here you can see the ancient map of the slave coast, which is in the West Africa, which is the Togo, Benin area today. And as you can see, just above where it says slave coast, you will see something saying KM of Judah. That's the Kingdom of Judah. So it was an area named specifically for these people. Some of them had run away from Portugal, but some of them had also migrated into the West. And as we know, they ended up in the Caribbean. Next slide. So just to confirm, we read here that the Jewish arrival in Barbados, Jamaica, Brazil, was a direct consequence of the Spanish Inquisition. So this was the forceful changing of religions. The first black people to set foot on Jamaican soil were not out of Africa, but they came out of Portugal. That's why some of you Jamaicans will hear your family talk about, you are Portuguese, or you are Jews. What happened was, when many of them landed in the Caribbean, they would not readily identify as Jews. They would identify themselves as Portuguese. So that's how many of you Jamaicans will have heard through your family line that that is where we are from, because it's related to this particular history of the Inquisition. Next slide.
Also, as well, that's why you've got some people of Caribbean descent who are named Cohen, for example.
Yes. Right. And Cohen is that Hebrew word for priest. So the likelihood is that person probably came from a priestly line. Put that slide up again, please. Thank you. So the Hebrews had their own writings, which we today identify as the Bible, but they referred to it as a Tanakh. What many of them probably were not aware of is that their ancestors who wrote the Tanakh, who wrote the Bible, actually predicted that at some point in their history, they would be taken away on ships, sold as slaves, and they would never be rescued. And today, if you dust down the Bible that you've got in the attic and look at this particular scripture, Deuteronomy 28, verse 68, that's what it tells you. Of course, you're not taught this in the church, and I'll explain why that is the case probably next week. But in their own writings, it foretold that this would be their fate. Next slide. Not only would that be their fate, but they were given a period of time that they would have to endure their fate. And remember, their ancestors wrote this about them. And that time period was going to be 400 years. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. So let's just have that confirmed by a historian, just for those of us who are just watching this for the first time. This might sound unbelievable to you, but let's just listen to a rabbi explain this with a bit more detail. Next slide.
Another area in Africa you have something big happening is in Nigeria. You have the Igbo people, or Igbo, pronounced either way. There's 40 million of them. There's been books written about it from scholars in Nigeria, from scholars from the Jewish people. And where it gets interesting is, in America, there was a slave trade. And a lot of the slaves, a very high percentage of them, came from Western Nigerian ports. And in America today, you see a very large movement of African Americans who say that they're the real chosen people, that they're the children of Israel, they're the Judeans. You know, so what are they just trying to create an identity for themselves because they were slaves, or is there really something here? And the answer is, most likely there is something there. And most likely, maybe that they were the original Israelites, and maybe that the Jewish people today, who are white Caucasian people, came in a little bit later on.
I want to discuss a little bit.
So that particular rabbi admits that those who were taken in the slave trade. He specifically mentions America, but it equally applies to South America. It equally applies to the Caribbean.
Yeah, I noticed how in Coffin say maybe as well, though.
Right, it said maybe. And then he said maybe those of us who are white came in afterwards. And that is a very familiar story to us, because you remember in the first few weeks of our discussion, we talked about how the first inhabitants of these islands here were proven to be black.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, other peoples migrated here and then claimed the place as their own, which is why we have why it's the way it is today. So that is what happened. So that brings us up to date. So today, I'm going to explain to you why this has happened to you. Right? Why this has happened to you? Why are you suffering? Why are you not in higher positions of power within the NHS or any of these top institutions? Why are you being deported? Right? Why are you being racially abused? And then people, you know, they do run commissions and white papers and moratoriums, and then nothing ever gets done. And then you continue to be oppressed. That's what we're going to talk about this evening. So
buckle up.
Let me set the scene, right? Because we have to go back to the origin of all of this, right? To where you came from, what happened, and that journey that brought you here to this point. Okay, so we're going to run another video, and this video is going to give you, this is going to be the context, this is going to be the place. This video is going to highlight the place where it all started. So let's run this video.
The Exodus actually happened. You have to figure out where the Red Sea crossing miracle happened. And there's multiple candidates going across the Gulf of Aqaba from Egypt into modern day Saudi Arabia. The most interesting candidate to me is Egypt's Nuweiba Beach. Thanks to Google Earth and being able to look from above as we've never been able to before, this spot at Nuweiba Beach on the Egyptian side of the possible crossing becomes almost obvious. You need a beach where you can fit millions of people. Those millions of people, the Hebrews, have to be blocked in by canyons, by the mountains, so that Pharaoh's army could have them trapped. The only place they could escape would be through the waters. And right at this location, amazingly, there appears to be an underwater land path. So if the waters were parted, they would need somewhere to walk to. And here, just at this location, there happens to be that underwater land path. So if the waters were parted, they could walk from Egypt through the waters of the Gulf of Aqaba into northwestern Saudi Arabia, into the area that the local Saudis call the land of Jethro. By this underwater land path going from Egypt's Nuweiba Beach into northwestern Saudi Arabia, there are very interesting coral anomalies that look like the remains of chariots, specifically chariot wheels. And there have been metal detectors brought down by divers that detected circular patterns of metal within the coral. Now, a lot of this would disintegrate over time, obviously, but coral can wrap itself around an object and dissolve it and retain the shape. And so divers who have gone to this area have described it as looking like an ancient junkyard, a place where potentially an army was destroyed and shattered into pieces, and the coral retained the shape of those debris. New research shows that Christian, Jewish, and Islamic sources for a long time have identified the real Mount Sinai as being the highest mountain near an area of Saudi Arabia called Al-Bad today. And if you go to Al-Bad today, the highest mountain is the Jebel al-Lawz mountain range, and specifically a peak named Jebel Makla, which means burned mountain. The reason it's called burned mountain is because it has a blackened top that makes it very distinct, and you can see it from far away. And so that leads people to see it and question, is this evidence of God descending upon the mountain in the form of a fire like the Bible says? The locals refer to this mountain as the Mountain of Moses. And they will tell you how generations after generations have known that this was the real Mount Sinai. In front of this mountain, just like the Bible says, you can see a collection of rocks that have inscriptions of people worshiping bulls. and the local tradition is that this is the golden calf worship site, to the point where locals will even suspect you of searching for gold if you go there. So we know from the book of Exodus that God tells Moses to set up an altar of uncut stone without steps at the foot of the mountain, and next to that altar to set up 12 pillars to represent the 12 tribes of Israel. When you go to the foot of this candidate for Mount Sinai, known as the Mountain of Moses, you come across an ancient altar where you can see where the animals would have been lined up for sacrifice. It is made of uncut stone and it has no steps. And next to it are the remains of about 12 marble pillars. One of the biggest miracles of the Exodus story that many people would find hard to believe is the story that God told Moses to go up to a rock and strike it with his rod so that water could pour forth and his people could have water to drink from who were dying of thirst. Amazingly, along this route to the possible Mount Sinai, you come across a gigantic split rock on top of a 100-foot hill, and the rock itself is between 40 and 60 feet high. When you climb it, you look like an ant next to it, and down the split in the middle and the rock below, it's smooth. The adjacent areas are all rough with different types of rocks. It's very bumpy. But then in this area, it looks like water poured forth from that rock, from the split, coming down the hill onto the ground below. And the local Bedouins, who have been told to keep people out and will actually confront you if you go there, will say that this is referred to by them as the split rock of Moses. At one point in my life, I thought that as human knowledge developed and as science developed, we would move further from the biblical account, that those would look more and more like myth. Now I see that it's looking more and more like an accurate historical account.
Amazing, Tony. Absolutely amazing, man.
So the reason why we obviously played that is to put it into context that the beginning of this nation happened in a real place, at a real time, at a real location. Now, what happened there? Now, this is how it concerns Black people so much, right? To answer the question about why we're in the situation we're in, I want you to think of a marriage. So let's put up the next slide, please.
Marriage. Okay.
Marriage.
Lovely couple. Good choice. Good choice.
Right. So a marriage can also be known as a marriage covenant, right? Which is when two parties join together and they are each obliged to fulfill certain criteria.
Such as?
Next slide. Mr. C, would you just read in the definition of a covenant what it says in the underlined part, please?
It reads, some types of covenant may also be enforceably by or against persons who are not a party to the original arrangement.
Right. So normally a covenant, which is similar to a contract, can be signed by two parties, but it can affect people that are not even there.
Right. Okay.
So let me give you an example. When you get married, you enter into a marriage covenant, but the covenant affects any future children you may have.
Okay.
The children did not sign the covenant.
Yes, 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 yes.
But they are affected by the covenant. And I want you to keep this in mind, right? So imagine a man and a woman come together into this covenant. Now that is a metaphor, right, for the Most High God and his people. So the Most High is the man, the husband, and his people are the wife.
Yes, yes.
Right? And they are entering into a covenant, an agreement. Next slide. So let's pick up the account. So we saw how they were at that mountain. They were gathered at the bottom of that mountain. Moses speaks to them, right? And Mr. C, would you just read that whole text there from the top, please?
And Moses said, "You are standing here in order to enter into a covenant with the Lord your God, a covenant the Lord is making with you this day."
Stop.
Further reads.
Stop. 1 sec. So that's it. So that's why they're here. If you remember the story, from those of you who went to Sunday school or you saw the movie, God had just rescued them from slavery in Egypt and had them brought to him, where he was now going to consecrate them as his people. They were going to become a nation for the very first time. Right? Carry on reading from where you left off, Mr. C.
"I am making this covenant with its oath, not only with you who are standing here with us today in the presence of the Lord our God, but also with those of you who are not here today."
Stop. Now, remember, we just spoke about a marriage. How two people can enter into a covenant, but it can affect people who are not even born yet. So when Moses said God is making a covenant with those people that were present that day, he also said that this covenant also includes those who are not there. Question: who are the people that were not there?
Children.
You're on the right track? Anybody in the comments? Who were the people that were not there? There were people that were there that day when those words were being spoken, when that covenant was being agreed. But who is it that were not there?
Those that have been displaced amongst the whole of the world.
Okay. You have for the answer, you have to look in the mirror.
I see me.
Right. It is you that wasn't there.
Future generations.
Well done, Sandra. All future generations that will be born out of these people were in a covenant, even though they didn't sign it, because a marriage took place that would produce descendants who were also included in that agreement.
So what we gonna do?
Don't worry. So look, so this is what would come onto the descendants if that marriage went well. Next slide. Would you read that, Mr. C, please?
"If you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all his commandments I give you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all nations on earth. All these blessings will come on you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God."
So those people who made that covenant, which included all their future descendants. Put the slide back up again, please. What was going to be their future? Let's have that slide back up.
Nations, set you high above all nations on earth. And blessings will come on you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God.
Right. So this is God's husbandly responsibility towards his wife. This is a metaphor we're talking about, right? But an agreement that if, remember, it was dependent upon obedience. If you fully obey, I will set you high above all the nations on earth. Which means that you would be the top man. Which means that anywhere you go in the world, you would get respect. Nobody would dream of disrespecting you if you fully obey. Next slide. Mr. C, would you read that again, please?
"The Lord will establish you as his holy people, as he promised you on oath. If you keep the commandments of the Lord, your God will walk in obedience to him. Then all the peoples on earth will see that you are called by the name of God and they will fear you.
So again, obedience meant that you would be at the top, and all nations of the world would fear you. Next slide. Mr. C, please.
Do not turn aside from any of the commands I give you today, to the right or to the left, following other gods and serving them.
Stop. So do you see that? So we have obedience, which is tied into following other gods. Now, bear in mind that we were talking about a marriage here. What happens when two people are married and one goes off to be with somebody else while they're supposed to be married?
They get peace and quiet? just a question. Yeah, they most likely enter into some new partnership,
right,
or some new kind of entanglement,
which brings consequences, right?
Yeah.
Let's read on.
However, if you do not obey the Lord your God and do not carefully follow all his commands and decrees I am giving you today, all these curses will come on you and overtake you.
Right. So on the one hand, the husband, God, the Most High, says that if you obey and don't follow foreign gods, you will be top dog on this planet. Everybody would fear you and respect you. You'd be rich. You'd be blessed. You'll be the number one influencer on earth. But conversely, if you don't, curses will come upon you and overtake you. Now, keeping in mind, husband and wife analogy. This is the husband now saying, look, it is under these conditions that we're going to enter into this covenant or contract. So how did the wife turn out? Next slide. Mr. C?
I will sentence you to the punishment of women who commit adultery and who shed blood. I will bring on you the blood vengeance of my wrath and jealous anger.
Right. So what we can see here is that things did not go well. So the command to avoid worshipping foreign gods when you already had the God there that you were in an arrangement with was similar to what happens if a woman decides to run off to be with another man while she's married. The Most High sees that as adultery. And the consequences for that spiritual adultery is what it says in the last sentence of that verse. It says, I will bring on you the blood vengeance of my wrath.
And jealous anger.
And jealous anger. Now, what were these people doing? What were the ancestors actually doing that brought this upon them?
Oh boy, they was watching Sainsbury's Christmas ads and saying, I'm never going to go into Sainsbury's again.
So first of all, they were actually doing outright devil worship.
They made false idols.
They were burning their infants in fire.
Ooh.
They were murdering. Now these are supposed to be, remember, the people who are in an arrangement, a covenant. They're in a covenant, right? So it's like having that woman there that just keeps going off. She meet this man, she meet that man, she meet that man. And she comes back home and you take her back and you take her back and you take her back. And
Charmaine Bradshaw was saying, isn't the church referred to as the bride of Christ in the Bible?
Incorrectly, Charmaine, and I'll explain that. So this is why the Most High had to send prophets, right? The prophets were like solicitors. The solicitors were there to remind the people of the contract, of the covenant that you're breaking, and you need to put this thing straight. The Most High is running out of patience with you if you don't. And what do? They took the prophets and killed them. Now, ultimately, the greatest prophet, which the Bible says is God's son, was sent to them to put them straight. But What happened to him?
He got sold out by his own people.
By his own people. Next slide. Not only was he sold out, the people were glad to take responsibility for his death. Not just the people that were there today. Everybody else, including you and I, who are the descendants of these people. This nation has the blood of Christ on its hands, and they don't even know. When you read some of when Christ's words talking about what would happen to these people, who would basically sell him out to the Romans to be killed, he pointed out that you would be scattered into different nations because of this. Imagine if you had a son that was helping out the community and was doing community work, and those same people had him killed after you tirelessly were helping them out. You would not take that very well.
No, not at all, Master.
And the death of Christ was the straw that broke the camel's back for the Most High. Next slide. This is what was predicted to happen to you as a people. The Bible likens this nation as a whore spiritually, always chasing after other gods, always looking for having a good time, for raving, but not seeking their husband. And because of that, in a metaphorical sense, God had to divorce you. He had to cut the arrangement. And cutting the arrangement means that, in a literal sense, if a man and woman are married and the man leaves the home and it's only the women and the children left in the home, that woman now is prey to other men who might realize that this woman don't have no man around her, so we can go around there. So what happened is the Most High stepped aside and said, all right, I'm going to leave you to your own devices. And the protection that this nation had was removed. Next slide. So you went through that whole suffering in Europe, in Portugal, right? Thousands of you were burnt, persecuted. You fled into Africa. The Portuguese came in there, looked for you in Africa, hired other tribes to come and drag you out, put you on ships, take you into these foreign lands where you would be oppressed. And the Lord would be nowhere to be seen. Mr. C, please read that verse there for us.
It reads, "Oh Lord, why are you hiding from us? Don't forget our suffering and oppression."
And doesn't it seem that way?
Why? Listen, it sure does, man.
Today we were talking about, you know, the likes of John Terry. We were talking about the NHS. We were talking about the Windrush scandal. Over and over again, someone said in the comments, are we ever going to get a break? This is the problem. In fact, the Most High was so accurate about what was going to befall you. He said this, next slide. Mr. C, would you read that for us?
The foreigners who reside among you will rise above you. And Pax definitely have done that, mate. They got shops everywhere.
So people who've come to this country where you reside, right? Where you reside, and you've been here 70, 80 years. People come here 20 years, 30 years, and they build shop, supermarket, and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And we still have patty shop and a couple of market stalls,
If we're lucky.
if we're lucky.
So let's start raise up the rents for the market stores and them have to leave.
Right? How could the Most High have known this? How could this have been written down? And then you are the living embodiment of this very experience. What do companies like PAX sell? PAX sell products that are unique to you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's like you plant, but you can't enjoy the fruit of the things you plant because someone else who is a foreigner just like you and is not even you are selling the products that you create. Next slide. And that's what the Most High says. You will plant a vineyard, but you will not even begin to enjoy its fruit. So in other words, you will create something so wonderful the world enjoys, but you never fully benefit from it.
Music, fashion, style, food. Oh wow.
Right? You will never fully benefit from the things you create. Whatever you create will be taken away, monetized, and make so many people rich but you. This is what happens to an adulterous wife of a nation, which made agreements and covenants with the Most High and then decides to do their own thing. You don't even know who you are because who you were was taken away from you. Next slide. Mr. C?
You will lose the inheritance, identity which I gave you. Jeremiah 17:4.
Thank you. So the identity was given to you at that place that we saw in the video just now on the mountain. When you were created into a nation, given a constitution of laws, made promises to obey, you were given an inheritance. That is when you became a nation.
Just want to say, sorry, Tracy Young's asked a very interesting question here, Tony. She says, very interesting, but why was this conditionally only put on black people?
Right, so it's not black people per se. We spoke about this a couple of weeks ago, that the term black people really just speaks of your phenotype or how you look on the outside, right? You know, the darkness of your skin in its various shades. This is a particular lineage that we're discussing here. We're narrowing it down specifically to those who were taken on ships and enslaved. That is not all black people. However, many black people who are in the West, in the Middle East, and in Africa are suffering the fate of the things we're talking about because they are the DNA blood lineage of the original ancestors who made this agreement. And you, your children, your grandchildren are in this agreement, whether you like it or not.
We're talking about the original Israelites.
Right.
The original Israelites.
Okay. So remember, covenant, right? A covenant can be enforced on people who are not even present at the original agreement.
Hence why you've got, hence why you've got phrases or quotes such as "the sins of the father will follow the sons."
Right, right. So a husband and wife getting married and then breaking up will have severe impacts on the children, even though the children did not sign that agreement. You, black people, are the children. You are part of this covenant that was reneged on, a contract that was broken. You know what it's like when you take out a 24-month contract with Talk, and then after 6 months you decide to pull out because you don't like the service. There are always penalties. Always. So you've been lost for so long that the Most High describes you in this way. Next slide.
My people, you are lost sheep. Jeremiah 56.
Whenever you see the word sheep referred to in the Bible, it is always to do with the people of God. God or Christ are always discussed as shepherds who lead their sheep. But this is what you look like in these foreign lands. Whether you're in the UK, Europe, America, Brazil, this is what you look like. You're lost. You're so lost. You don't know where to look to find yourself. But your history is the clue. Slavery, the 400 years plus of slavery that your ancestors have endured, and the oppression that you are going through now is the linchpin between where you are now and who you were. And as I pointed out last week, right, the physical symptoms that you're seeing has a spiritual root. So basically, when you say, well, black people have to come together, what we have to do is put our money together and build schools and build banks and build infrastructure, and we can build our own cities. Let me show you what the Most High says about that. Next slide. Mr. Slide, Mr. C, please read that.
The Lord will send you on curses, confusion, and rebuke in everything you put your hand to, until you are destroyed and come to sudden ruin because of the evil you have done in forsaking him.
Thank you. So you want to start business, you want to start a multi-million-pound empire, you want to be CEO of a big tech company, you want to build your own cities. The Lord is going to send confusion on you. Anything you try to do that is of any weight, of any measure, small fightings, yeah, you can do them. You can organize trips, you can organize raves, you can have small little business ventures. But anything serious in this world, this is why you will fail.
So is this probably the reason why such organizations like as the Black Panther Party, or even though it was set up absolutely brilliantly, that it all came crumbling down?
Yeah. Same thing like the online schools. Same thing like all the black leaders that came before, that came with a message of liberation. What happened to them?
Yeah.
What happened to Black Wall Street? What happens? You get 10 black men decide they're going to start a business. They all put 10 grand in. One black man run off with the money.
Angela Cozier says, my nan always said we were cursed. There was a bit of wisdom in our elderly folk.
Right.
Always a bit of wisdom.
Right. But the elders didn't know exactly how this has come about. So if you ever had a feeling, as a lot of us do, that you were kings and queens at some distant point in time, yeah, you were, but the time was such a short period of time. Because the problem with this nation, as the Bible points out, is that you are stiff-necked, hard of hearing, love a good time people.
Well, it's hard not to be, Tony. I mean, if you're in bondage for 400 years of hardcore slavery, after working for the man for 400 years, you think yourself, well, you know, I deserve a gap year now.
But the people were like that before.
Yeah.
They were like that before. What we have today, the current generation of people on this planet, from this nation, are only different people with the same characteristics that they had in ancient times, because those things have been passed down. See, if you were to do a DNA test, right, in one of these companies, you're going to find links to Africa, you're going to find links to Portugal, you're going to find links to England. In all the areas that we've covered in our history discussions, you're going to find those links in your DNA test. And why? Because that's where your ancestors roamed. They had to go into exile. They were kicked out of where they, because they wouldn't behave. They acted like a spiritual prostitute. They're supposed to be a nation, a holy nation married unto the Lord, which would have made them the #1 nation on planet Earth. Instead, they are at the bottom of everything.
So Tony, I've got to ask you the big question, man. That is there a solution to this? Because, or is there time? Because obviously we know that we spoke just a while about the 400 years that has come to pass. We are no longer in physical slavery. Obviously, a lot of people say we're in mental slavery now, but is this now what we're seeing with like the whole Black Lives Matter movement? Is this now a window for us as Israelites or as chosen people to gain momentum to do the right thing? Or is there, as Sam Cooke would saying, a change is going to come? Or is this going to happen continuously throughout our generations and our children's generations?
Next slide. So I'm going to come to that, Mr. C. I'm not ignoring you.
No, that's cool.
So this is the situation we find ourselves in. Right? It comes. It's a package deal of tribulation. You're getting tribulation deluxe. Why? Because you're in a covenanted agreement that you're not holding up your end. Your ancestors didn't hold up their end, and you're not holding up your end. And for the most part, most of your life, you've been living in darkness about who you are. Next slide. So bearing in mind that we were talking about a marriage, okay, we're going to end up with this slide. And this is the Most High speaking. So Mr. C, would you just read that first, please?
Okay, so this is from Jeremiah. It says, if a man divorces his wife and she leaves him and marries another man, should he return to her again? Would not the land be completely defiled? But you have lived as a prostitute with many lovers. Would you now return to me, declares the Lord? Wow, that's deep, man. Woo! That's deep.
So the Lord is asking a question to his nation. He has divorced you, not because he wanted to, but you forced his hand. You are responsible for breaking the covenant. You're responsible for killing his son. And the Most High is asking, can he really take you back? Because you've just been nothing but a national prostitute. And he's asking, the very last quotation at the bottom says, would you now return to me? In other words, would you?
I mean, it's a very good question. I mean, answers what pop up in my mind is if the prodigal son's father can take him back.
And you know, this has nothing to do with church, you see.
Yeah.
Right? You know, I didn't pull it up, but there are verses that predict that you would go into the church. Well, what we know now as a church is you'll be worshiping other gods. See, the gods of the churches are not the God of the Bible.
Yes.
That's a European God, a white God that was created for you, but not the God of the Hebrews, which is what the biblical God is. So now that God has divorced you, and we are living our own life, we're doing our own thing, we have ambitions, we're looking forward to our holidays, our pensions, we're going to have a good time, we're going to look it up. Yet the very reason why we're suffering under these circumstances has everything to do with the covenant which our ancestors broke and which was passed down to us. And the question that we're going to answer next week is, are we going to return to him?
Yeah, you see how you do it, Steve? You see how you do Wow. You know what? It's funny that you should touch upon this, because I've always said, you know, to myself and in a few conversations, that I think the missing thing for us as a people is that we're so dispersed amongst the world that we have no language, no religion. Man, it's you know, this is the thing. But when you look at certain other cultures, the thing what they've got is language and religion, which allows them to, you know, if you see, like, there's certain buildings in London or wherever you are in the UK, what used to be community centres, and then what we saw was that a particular community came in there with their language and their religion, and now that building is like a church-ish kind of building for just their community only. And I think because we haven't got any unified language or religion, we are like almost the lepers of the earth at the moment.
Can we just
Interesting.
put the last slide there, please, if we can, just for references. If anybody wants to check this for themselves, you can dust down your Bibles and have a look at these specific chapters and read all about your history, which is contained in those 3 books, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Ezekiel. It outlines perfectly in greater detail than I've discussed what would befall you. Now, sorry,
yeah.
we on that point, you see, I think it was a few weeks ago, we talked about when we compared ourselves to, you know, people like the Indians, Chinese, and Jews and all that. We discussed this whole central theme about spirituality that these people have, that they come together and they actually see themselves as brothers.
Yes. Right? Yes.
Under this spiritual banner. And we don't have that. You see, we don't see each other as brothers. We are actually, and we are literally related, but we don't see each other as brothers and sisters. That's why we can fight each other the way we do. Our young people who don't understand this will deal with each other the way they do in the streets. But when you start looking at your brethren, that this person is your brother, if you go back far enough, you will find a link. These people are literally what the Bible describes as the 12 tribes.
Well, what I find interesting as well is that I think ourselves as a, not, and again, when I say ourselves, I'm talking about a certain section of ourselves, is that we're so spiritually lost now that we even have brothers fighting against brothers. Not saying this is anything new, because obviously Cain killed Abel. However, it seems like there's a disconnect, which it seems like, you know, like, you know, even if we look at how we were in the 70s and early 80s compared to how we are now in 2020s, there's a massive disconnect. You know, when we watched something like Small Axe, the very first one, where we saw how a community came together and they had this beautiful place called Mangrove, where all of the community to come together and break bread as such. It seems to be few and far between that we've got those kind of places now. And what we should have is more of them rather than less. We should have more of a coming together than less.
Right. So in some ways, it's like we're going backwards. Do you see? Once we make a step of progress, and then it's 2 steps back.
Do you think that this is because as a generation that we aspire to be more like, we aspire to be more westernized, we aspire to be more we aspire more to assimilate with those who we see are not like us?
Yes, but then we have to, because of people who don't know themselves and don't in many respects don't like each other. Right? They're always going to live. They're always going to try and be like the leading nation, because what they see is hanging around with the leading nation is going to get me somewhere in life. Let me just sort of take you back, even during the time of Christ. Many people, only when you appreciate that the Hebrews are black and Christ is black, can you really understand what this is really all about.
Mm-hmm.
Christ lived under a colonial system.
Yes.
Right? They were colonized by the Romans and oppressed in their own land, paying very, very high taxes. You had many Hebrews who actually joined the Roman armies. Many of them worked for the government, spying on their brothers. Many of them were revolutionaries who wanted to fight against the Romans. Many of them were always asking, well, when are we going to be free? And it's in that environment that Christ arrived.
Mm.
And he was saying to them, look, your problem is a spiritual one. But they wanted to fight the Romans off. And that was never going to work because the Romans conquered the whole world. Some of them thought that by getting rich and having money and setting up themselves in this life would bring them the freedom. But you're doing it with Roman coins. You're doing it with a Roman economy.
And you're going to have to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's.
Exactly. And Caesar can put that up anytime he wants.
I've seen literally what happened with the European Jews who had acquired quite a lot of wealth when they was in Poland or Austria, and then obviously what happened with Germany, and near enough that the end result was the Holocaust, and again the dispersal of those people all over the world, and and they literally had to reset and restart again.
But they now, you see, they are the modern Jews.
Yeah.
In the same way that the modern English are English today.
Yeah. They're not the indigenous.
English.
Yeah.
Let me just answer a couple of points that are in the comments. So Tracy Young asks, is that why we cannot get any further, even though so many of us go to church and pray? Yes, Tracy, that's exactly the reason. Furthermore, the churches know who you are, and they know the reason why you're in this condition. But I'm going to go into it next week why they don't tell you.
Because basically the Vatican has got a whole museum of truth, which they have buried in miles and miles and miles of secret passages underneath that so-called Roman capital city. But that's another story.
Boris knows, the government knows, the governments of the world know your history. They know the peoples that are in their lands. They're not fools. They've just renamed you, right? You've received so many different names throughout your history, but they know who these people are.
Yeah.
So now chat show says, but I thought you said this is not targeted at black people, at Tony. As I said, I'm talking about a specific lineage of black people within the black nation. Black people encompass hundreds of tribes and different nations. I'm speaking of one specifically, those who are descendants of enslaved people. Sandra Henry says, we have had a lot of obstacles. Yes, but unfortunately, it's of our own making. That's the problem. So we've had this narrative, right, in the culture that somehow we were sitting on the beach one day and some evil men came, took us away and did what they wanted. So we've lived with that, right? We've owned that narrative. But when you go back further enough and you realize that the way the universe operates, nothing happens for nothing. Right?
It's almost like that somewhere in Europe there's a little Caucasian girl who's speaking fluent Spanish and thinking that these two people are her parents, but really and truly it's the McCanns. No, that's another fairy story. Sorry.
But you know the point. But the point being here is that, you're gonna get for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. See, so your tribulation, your slavery, everything that you've suffered was not for no reason. Right? The narrative is that you are those people. You accepted. Look, if things had gone right, we wouldn't be here now. We'd all be rulers. We'd all be the top man. We'd be like how white people are when they go to other countries of the world. Doors open, first class seats at restaurants, first class on the plane. Everybody knows who they are.
Yeah.
That's what we accepted that agreement, thinking to ourselves, yes, that's what we want. the Most High is good to us. But instead, we became like an adulterous wife. And as such, and then to culminate that by killing the Black Christ, and then having his blood upon not just those in his day, but all the descendants that would follow him. Now you understand why you can't get that job. Now you understand why your youngsters are being stopped in the street. Now you understand why you're not in the top tier of companies and CEO. Now you know why you can't run all these companies. Now you know why other people are taking your stuff. Things that you create are taken away and monetized.
Now Chuck Show says, is this why our names have been changed by purpose, as the majority of us have slave master and surnames? Take away our ID and confuse us even more.
Yes. Yes.
Donna Ben says it would be like the portrayal in Noughts and Crosses. Very good program. If anyone saw it or even read the book.
Right.
Natasha John Baptiste says it's time to change the narrative. Very much so. I think that there is a change happening, Tony. I think there is an awakening happening. Natasha John Baptiste, thank you for this one as well. Says Cambridge University have documents that we can actually look at. So it'd be interesting to see if they've got anything online as well.
And the British Library, and actually you can access a lot of that. A lot of those documents have been digitized, so you can find them on the net. Adriana says, so are we looking for God's forgiveness? Absolutely. You can't kill nobody's son and act like, but I don't know, in your mouth.
And I think what you said there, Tony, is a great moment of realization, because because as I was listening to you, in my head I was like, well, this is a bit deep, man. It's like I never did nothing, you know. I went around in them days, bruv. You understand? It weren't me or my people who killed Christ. And for a moment, I felt almost like a white person who was almost saying, well, you know what? Slavery, I went around them days, was I?
Exactly. You can't, there's no way black people can say, oh, well, I wasn't there, so it got nothing to do with me. Because if you're going to use that reasoning, then white people are right when they say I wasn't around during slavery, so therefore I don't owe you reparations. You can't have it both ways, black people. You understand?
Very good. Very good point.
This narrative is the only one which explains your whole plight. Most of the times when we're in WhatsApp groups and we're talking amongst each other, we're always like, yeah, slavery, 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 the white man did this, the white man did that. No narrative I've ever heard in my whole life answers the question that were burning inside of my mind for decades about why we, with the best will in the world, with the best intentions, with the talent, with the respect in certain quarters of this world that we have as a group of people, right? Because by rights, the people with the skill and the merit should be the richest and the most powerful people on the planet, right?
Wakanda.
See that? But how is it that the people with the most talent, skill, and who have a lot of admiration from a lot of quarters in the world are at the bottom? How could that be possible, logically?
Tony, you've thrown up a massive one here, man. Because again, you know, I know there's a lot of people who are watching this who are probably not would not classify themselves as being religious. But again, I just want to clarify: this is not about church. This is about spirituality. And again, I think it's something that we have to start having discussions about. It's something we're going to have to start having a look at, because we cannot use references of a biblical nature and not address spirituality. We can't say, yeah, it was written, said that we're going to be enslaved for 400 years. We've seen it. That prophecy has come to light. We can't be talking about the vaccination and we're not take no vaccination because it's the mark of the beast. But we don't want to talk about spirituality. So, you know, and whatever we look at, there's songs which, you know, Tony pointed out a couple of weeks ago, you know, Desmond Decker and the Israelites, you know. And if we continue to bury our heads in the sands as regards to who we are spiritually as a people, then the song "See the Hypocrites, Them a Go Long There" will be true as well.
So that being the case, Mr. C, I mean, obviously we're going to bring it to a pause here.
Yeah.
But if my narrative is correct, and I say if for the sake of doubters, then we should also know what the future holds, the near future, for our people, right?
Definitely.
And indeed, we have that information, which we're going to share. And we're going to talk about where world events are going now and where you're going to be in those events. Because the nations now have got the world under lock and they're not looking to change it to go back to normal.
We've seen it.
The question is, where do you fit into that picture? What does the Most High have to say about that? And how do we deal with this problem of a contract or covenant that's been broken? Well, we'll talk about that next week.
Night, brother, man. Christopher, how you doing, sir? Blessings in Judge our name. Listen, please, wherever you are, if we can give Tony a round of applause, man. He spends so much time, research, and energy into this. You know, again, Tony, what's your social media handles, please? Because a lot of people are saying that, you know, do you do online classes? Can they get further information? Just so that people know where to find you.
Right. So you can add me on Facebook, Tony Crossbody, and also Instagram, same name, Tony Crossbody, all one word.
There you go. There you go. But please, don't inundate him with stupidness, because we need him to be here to spend the time and energy sharing his wonderful information. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that you know, again, those of you who have been watching with the children, we apologize if we've kept you up a little bit later than per usual. But again, when it comes to certain subjects, you know, if we're talking about dances and palaver, we seem to talk for hours and hours. But when it comes to with regards to the betterment of our people, every now and then we need to just dig a little bit deeper and talk for a little bit longer. Just want to say thank you for all of you who have been watching. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. We're here every single Tuesday, 7 p.m. We just want to finish with this one little thing. Leroy Logan has written a book about his life. The book is, have we got that actual slide there, please? There we go. It's called Closing Ranks. It's by Leroy Logan. It's My Life as a Cop. That will have the full in-depth information as regards to this man's extraordinary life. He was also awarded by MBE by the Queen in 2001 for his role in developing anti-racist policies for the police. So again, this has been What a Week. It's goodbye from myself, Mr. C, and
goodbye from me. See you again next week.
Same time, same place.